The restaurant was glowing that evening, its chandeliers reflecting off polished glasses and golden cutlery. Soft jazz music floated in the background as guests filled the tables, their laughter blending with the quiet hum of conversation. The staff moved quickly but gracefully, balancing trays and smiles. Among them was a quiet waitress who rarely drew attention to herself. She kept her head slightly down, focusing on her work, never saying more than she needed to. She wasn't new to this job. In fact, she'd been here long enough to know the rhythm of every shift, the early rush, the calm between orders, the moments when the kitchen grew tense, and the nights when everything ran smooth like a song. She did her work carefully, never complaining, never slowing down. Some of the newer workers often wondered why she stayed in such a demanding place when she seemed capable of so much more. But she never spoke about her past, and no one asked too deeply. She had a gentle face, quiet eyes that looked kind but distant, like someone who carried memories they didn't talk about. When she smiled, it was polite, just enough to make a customer feel welcomed, but never long enough to reveal what she truly felt. There was something about her that didn't quite fit the noisy, glamorous world of the restaurant. It wasn't that she was unhappy. She just seemed like her heart was somewhere else. Every evening when the shift began, she'd glance toward the corner of the room. There stood an old black piano, shiny, elegant, and perfectly tuned. The restaurant used it only on weekends, when a hired pianist played soft tunes to impress the guests. But during weekdays it sat untouched, covered with a light cloth like a sleeping memory. And every time she passed by it, she couldn't help but look at it, not for long, just a second or two, enough to make her remember what it felt like to sit before one. Years ago, that was her dream, to perform on a stage, to lose herself in melodies that spoke louder than words. She had started learning piano when she was a child, and by her teenage years she had become remarkably skilled. Music was her comfort, her language, her way of escaping life's noise. But dreams, she learned, didn't always last. Life changed suddenly for her family when her father fell ill. Money became tight. Lessons stopped. Days were filled with worry, and the piano keys gathered dust. When her father passed, she had no choice but to leave school and work. That was when she learned what survival sounded like. Not music, but the clinking of coins, the ticking of time, and the endless requests of customers. Still, sometimes at night, when she returned to her small apartment, she would hum the melodies she once played. Her fingers would move slightly as if remembering invisible keys. Music never left her. It just waited patiently inside her, silent and loyal. At the restaurant, she was known for her patience. Even when others snapped at her or made careless jokes, she never reacted. Some coworkers didn't understand her calmness. They thought she was timid. A few even teased her lightly, believing she didn't mind. "You're too quiet," one of them said one day during a break. "You should laugh more. This job's boring if you don't have fun." She smiled softly and replied, "I'm fine. I like watching people enjoy themselves." That was all she said. What they didn't know was that she had learned long ago that not every fight was worth fighting, and not every word was worth saying. Silence to her was a shield. That Friday evening was busier than usual. A corporate group had booked half the restaurant to celebrate a deal. The place buzzed with chatter and laughter, glasses clinking as waiters rushed around trying to keep up. The quiet waitress was assigned to serve their table. It was the largest one, and the group was loud, full of energy, and already halfway through their second bottle of champagne. As she approached with the appetizers, one of the men at the table made a casual remark. "You move like you're scared of us." His tone was teasing, but the laughter that followed felt sharp. She gave a small smile, set down the plates carefully, and said, "Not scared, just careful." Her calmness seemed to amuse them even more. Another woman at the table said jokingly, "She looks too gentle for this job. Maybe she's better at something soft, like art or music." The group laughed again, not out of cruelty perhaps, but out of the careless amusement that comes when people forget there's a real heart behind the smile of someone serving them. When she walked away to fetch more drinks, the same woman added under her breath, "Can you imagine her trying to play an instrument? She'd probably break it." They all chuckled. None of them noticed the pianist who played near the corner had quietly stopped between songs and glanced in her direction, sensing the shift in the room. The waitress heard the words. Not all of them, but enough. She didn't flinch, didn't turn around. Years of practice had taught her to let such things pass like wind. But somewhere deep inside, a familiar ache stirred. It wasn't anger. It was something softer. A quiet sadness mixed with the longing she'd buried long ago. As the night went on, she continued working with the same grace as always. She poured drinks, cleared plates, smiled politely, thanked customers. But every time she passed the piano, her eyes softened a little more. She could almost hear a melody whispering in her mind, one she used to play long ago, when the world was kinder and her hands were free of trays and gloves. By the time the group finished their main course, the pianist was taking his usual break. The room felt lighter, filled with conversation and music from the speakers. The waitress brought dessert to the table. The same man from before, a little tipsy now, grinned and said, "You know, since you're so quiet, maybe you should be the one playing the piano for us." "Give us a tune, huh?" The others laughed again, clearly entertained by the idea. She froze for just a second, tray still in hand. "Oh, I don't think I could," she said softly, trying to keep it light. But the teasing didn't stop. "Come on, we won't judge," one of them shouted. "Or are you afraid to touch it?" another added. The restaurant grew quieter around them. Even her manager looked up from behind the counter, unsure whether to step in. The pianist, now returning from his break, paused mid-step, curious. She felt her face grow warm, but her voice remained calm. "I haven't played in a long time," she said, her eyes briefly glancing at the piano. Then quietly she added, "But maybe one day again." The group chuckled, uninterested in her words, already moving on to their next joke. She walked away, placing her tray down near the counter, her hands trembling slightly. She took a deep breath and tried to steady herself. The noise faded for her. All she could hear was the memory of a melody in her head, the one that had always waited for her to return. That night, when her shift ended and the restaurant began to empty, she stayed behind for a moment, pretending to wipe down a nearby table. The piano still stood in the corner, untouched again. She slowly walked toward it, ran her fingers lightly across the cover, and whispered almost to herself, "One day." Then she turned off the lights, picked up her bag and stepped out into the cool night air. The sound of laughter still echoed faintly behind her, but she didn't mind. She knew something had awakened inside her, something that would not stay silent much longer. The next evening began just like any other. The restaurant lights glowed softly. The chatter of customers filled the air, and the familiar rhythm of plates, orders, and footsteps moved like a practiced song. Yet for the quiet waitress, something felt different. She didn't know why, but her heart carried a strange heaviness. It wasn't sadness exactly, more like the echo of something unfinished. All through the morning, as she prepared for her shift, her thoughts kept returning to the night before. The laughter, the teasing words, the way her hands had trembled when they mentioned the piano. She hadn't thought about performing in years. Even when she saw that beautiful black piano each night, she never once imagined actually sitting down to play it. But after last night, the thought lingered, growing louder with each passing hour. When she arrived at work, her co-workers were already setting tables and polishing glasses. They greeted her with their usual smiles. To everyone else, she looked as calm and composed as always. No one could guess that her mind was quietly wrestling with old memories. She went about her duties, folding napkins, checking water glasses, taking orders. But every time she passed the piano, she felt that same pull. It almost seemed to be waiting for her. She wondered what would happen if she actually played it again, even for a minute. Would her fingers remember the touch? Would the music still live inside her the way it used to? Around mid-evening, the same group of wealthy guests returned, the same ones who had teased her the night before. They were louder this time, celebrating something new. Their laughter reached across the room, echoing through the restaurant. Some of the staff exchanged tired looks. A few even rolled their eyes quietly, knowing what kind of night it was going to be. The waitress tried not to look in their direction, but she couldn't help hearing their voices. They had already begun their jokes and playful remarks with the staff. She kept her focus, pretending not to notice. When it was time to serve their table again, she approached with her usual grace, carrying trays filled with wine glasses and appetizers. The group recognized her immediately. "Ah, look who's here again," one of them said with a smirk. "Our shy little pianist." The others laughed, and someone added, "Maybe she practiced after work, who knows?" Her heart pounded, but she smiled faintly. "Good evening," she said calmly, setting their plates down. "I hope you're all having a good night." Her politeness only seemed to encourage them. "You know, we were serious about that offer," one of the men said, tapping the table with a fork. "You should really play for us tonight. It'd make this dinner special." She shook her head gently. "I'm afraid that's not part of my job," she replied, still kind but firm. "Come on," another woman at the table said teasingly. "You said maybe one day. Why not today?" There was laughter again. The room around them grew slightly quieter as nearby tables turned to see what was going on. She could feel all the eyes on her now. Customers, co-workers, even her manager near the bar. She wanted to disappear, but she didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flustered. "Enjoy your meal," she said softly, stepping back before turning away. As she walked toward the kitchen, she could still hear them joking behind her. She tried to focus on her work, but their words echoed in her mind. For the first time in years, she felt that strange mix of fear and longing again. The kind that comes when something inside you wants to be heard, but you keep it locked away. Later that evening, as she brought dessert to another table, she noticed the restaurant's pianist taking his usual short break. The piano sat quietly, reflecting the soft golden lights from above. The group from before noticed too. "Look," one of them said, "the piano's free now." Perfect timing. Before she could walk away, the same man who had teased her most stood up. He called out loudly so the entire restaurant could hear. "Hey, why don't you finally give us that song tonight?" The laughter that followed was louder this time, and several guests looked up from their meals to see what was happening. The pianist froze near the counter, unsure whether to intervene. Her manager glanced nervously in her direction but didn't say anything. The restaurant had important clients there and no one wanted to cause a scene. She stood there for a few seconds, tray in her hands, heart beating faster than it had in years. The room seemed to wait. She could feel embarrassment rising in her chest. But then something inside her shifted, a small, quiet courage that had been buried for too long. She placed her tray down on a nearby counter, took a slow breath, and turned toward the group. "If I play," she said quietly, "it will be just one song." The laughter stopped. For a brief moment, everyone was silent, unsure if she was serious. Then one of the men clapped sarcastically. "All right then, let's see what you've got." She walked toward the piano. Her steps were slow but steady. The sound of her shoes against the wooden floor seemed to echo louder than usual. Every head in the room turned toward her now. Some people whispered to each other, curious. The air felt heavy with expectation and doubt. She reached the piano and gently removed the cover. Her fingers brushed the smooth surface of the keys. It had been years since she'd touched one, yet somehow it felt familiar, like returning to a forgotten home. For a long moment, she didn't move. She just sat there, eyes closed, her hands resting quietly on her lap. The guests at the table started to fidget, whispering and chuckling again. But then she placed her hands on the keys. The first note she played was soft, almost fragile, but it carried across the room like a breath of air. The noise around her faded instantly. One by one, the voices stopped, the laughter died, and all that remained was the sound of the piano. Her fingers began to move slowly, remembering patterns she thought she'd forgotten. The melody grew stronger, warmer, filled with emotion. Each note seemed to tell a story, not of perfection but of pain, love, and resilience. People stared in silence, unable to believe what they were hearing. The same waitress they'd mocked just minutes ago was now playing with such grace and soul that it felt unreal. Even the hired pianist stood motionless, his expression softening with admiration. As she played, she forgot where she was. She forgot the crowd, the laughter, the long days and weary nights. The only thing that existed was the music. It poured out of her like a voice she'd kept buried for too long. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply remembering who she was. When the last note finally faded into silence, the room stayed still for several seconds. Then, as if waking from a dream, the audience began to applaud. It started softly, then grew louder and louder until the entire restaurant was on its feet. Her hands trembled slightly as she lowered them from the keys. Her eyes glistened, not from pride but from quiet relief. She stood, gave a small, humble nod, and whispered, "Thank you." The same guests who had mocked her earlier sat speechless. The man who had challenged her now looked down, unable to meet her eyes. The woman beside him murmured something under her breath, perhaps an apology, though it was too soft to hear. The pianist, still watching from the corner, smiled warmly and clapped the loudest. He walked over and said softly, "You play beautifully." She smiled back, just a little, and replied, "It's been a long time." As she returned to her duties, the crowd slowly returned to their meals, though the energy in the room had completely changed. Conversations were quieter now, eyes softer, laughter more respectful. The group who had mocked her earlier didn't speak much after that. When they finally left, they thanked her politely. No jokes this time, no laughter. Just quiet nods of respect. After the restaurant closed, she stayed behind to help clean up. Her manager approached her and said, "You should have told me you could play like that." She smiled, wiping a table. "It's just something I used to do," he shook his head. "It's not just something. You gave everyone here a moment they won't forget." She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. Deep inside, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. When the last of the lights were turned off and the doors locked, she walked once more to the piano. The room was empty, quiet, peaceful. She sat down again just for a minute and played a few soft notes. This time not for anyone else, but for herself. The sound echoed gently in the stillness, wrapping around her like an old friend. She smiled to herself. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like just a waitress. She felt whole again. As she left the restaurant, the night breeze brushed against her face. Somewhere in the distance, she thought she could still hear the fading echo of her song. It wasn't grand or perfect, but it was real. It was hers. And deep down, she knew this was just the beginning of something new. Something beautiful she'd almost forgotten how to dream about. The next morning, the restaurant felt different. There was a kind of quiet buzz in the air, the kind that comes after something special has happened but no one quite knows how to describe it. The waitress came in early as usual, tying her apron neatly and greeting the staff with her gentle smile. But this time, when her co-workers looked at her, their expressions had changed. It wasn't the usual polite nods or distracted greetings. There was surprise in their eyes and a kind of admiration, too. "Hey," one of them said softly as she passed by. "I didn't know you could play like that." She smiled shyly. "It's been a long time," she replied. Another server walked over, shaking his head in disbelief. "You made the whole room quiet last night. Even the regulars stopped eating to listen." "I've never seen that happen here." She didn't know how to respond, so she just smiled again. Deep down, her heart was warm. For years, she had worked in silence, blending into the background. And now, suddenly, people were seeing her, really seeing her. Not just as a waitress, but as someone with something to share. What she didn't know yet was that one of the customers had recorded her performance on their phone. The short video captured her sitting at the piano, fingers gliding over the keys and the way the entire restaurant had fallen silent around her. That customer had uploaded it to social media later that night with a simple caption, "When a waitress humbles an entire room with one song." By the time she started her shift the next day, the video had already been shared hundreds of times. By evening, it reached thousands. People were commenting things like, "Pure talent," and "This is what real music sounds like." Some even asked for her name, wanting to know more about her story. But she didn't know any of this yet. She was just going about her day, quietly serving tables, still unaware that her world was about to change. Later that afternoon, her manager came out from the office, holding his phone with wide eyes. "Did you know you're all over the internet right now?" he said. She blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" He turned the screen toward her. There it was in the video of her playing, already at 500,000 views. Her heart skipped a beat. "Who posted that?" she asked softly. "Someone from last night, I guess," he replied. "Look at these comments. Everyone's talking about how amazing you are." She didn't know what to say. Her hands trembled slightly as she watched herself on the screen, her head bent, her fingers moving across the piano keys. It felt surreal. For years, she had been invisible, unnoticed, and now people from all over were listening to her music. By the end of the week, the video crossed 1 million views. Messages started pouring into the restaurant's social media page. People asking who she was, if she'd perform again, if she had any more recordings. The restaurant, seeing an opportunity, decided to officially feature her as their pianist every weekend. When her manager told her the news, she was stunned. "Are you sure?" she asked, still uncertain if she deserved it. "You earned it," he said. People are coming here just to hear you now." That Friday she played again, not because someone mocked her, but because she wanted to. The restaurant was packed. Some people even waited outside, hoping to get a table. The atmosphere felt different this time. The same piano that had once been a silent decoration was now alive again, and she was at its heart. When she began to play, the audience listened quietly, their faces softened by the glow of candlelight. There was no laughter, no teasing, just admiration. Some guests even recorded her again, but this time she didn't mind. She wasn't nervous anymore. Her hands moved freely and her music filled the room with warmth. After she finished her first song, the applause was thunderous. People stood and clapped, smiling at her with genuine respect. Some even had tears in their eyes. She bowed slightly, her voice gentle as she said, "Thank you." After her shift ended, she walked home in the cool night air, her mind still replaying the evening. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't felt before: purpose. The following week brought even more surprises. A local news reporter visited the restaurant, asking to do a short feature on her. At first, she hesitated. She wasn't used to attention, and part of her feared people might think she was chasing fame. But the manager convinced her. "People need stories like yours," he said. "Something honest, something real." So she agreed. The interview was simple. They filmed her at the restaurant, playing the same piano under the soft lights, and asked her about her journey. She spoke quietly, telling them how she had loved music since childhood, how life had taken her in a different direction, and how she never thought she'd play again. Her honesty touched everyone who watched it. The video spread quickly, gathering millions of views within days. Messages began arriving from strangers, some from musicians who said she had inspired them, others from people who simply thanked her for reminding them that talent never dies, no matter how long it sleeps. One message stood out to her. It was from her old piano teacher. The teacher wrote, "I always knew you had something special. I'm so proud to see you find it again." She cried quietly after reading that. It felt like a piece of her old life had come back home. As weeks went by, her weekends became something magical. Every time she sat at that piano, she played with her heart wide open. Each song told a little bit of her story, her struggles, her quiet strength, and her rediscovered joy. People listened not just to the notes, but to the emotion behind them. Her co-workers also began to change toward her. Those who once teased her now respected her deeply. Some even apologized, admitting they never imagined she had such a gift. But she never held grudges. "We all see people differently once we know their story," she said softly. The restaurant thrived too. Reservations doubled and new customers came from other towns just to hear her play. She didn't care about the money or the attention. What meant the most to her was the feeling of belonging again. One night, while she was playing her final song of the evening, she noticed an older woman sitting near the back of the room. The woman's eyes were closed, her face calm, as if she was remembering something beautiful. When the song ended, the woman approached her and said, "My late husband was a pianist. Listening to you play tonight made me feel like he was here again." "Thank you." The waitress smiled gently, holding back tears. "I'm glad I could do that," she said. Moments like that reminded her why she loved music, not for fame or applause, but for connection, for the way it could reach into people's hearts and remind them they weren't alone. Eventually, a small music school reached out, inviting her to volunteer as a part-time instructor for children. At first, she was hesitant. It had been so long since she'd taught anyone. But after visiting the school and seeing the children's excitement, she agreed. Teaching them reignited something even deeper within her. She saw in their eager faces the same spark she once had as a child, the same innocent love for music. She taught them gently, patiently, always reminding them, it's not about being perfect. It's about feeling what you play. Every evening after finishing her lessons, she would return to the restaurant and perform. Her life had found a rhythm again, a balance between the past she thought she'd lost and the present she was finally learning to embrace. Months passed, but she never grew proud or distant. She remained the same kind, humble person she had always been. When customers complimented her, she always smiled and said, "Thank you for listening." One evening, near closing time, the same group of guests who had once mocked her returned to the restaurant. They seemed quieter now, more reserved. When they recognized her sitting at the piano, their expressions changed. After she finished her piece, they approached her. One of them spoke first, his voice sincere. We wanted to apologize. We were rude to you that night. We didn't know who you really were. She looked at them kindly and said, "You don't need to apologize. That night helped me remember who I was too." They nodded, visibly moved. "You taught us something," one of them said quietly. She smiled softly. "Sometimes people only see what's on the surface," she replied. "But everyone carries a story underneath." As they left, she felt a quiet peace settle over her. Life had come full circle. The people who once laughed at her were now thanking her, not because she had proven them wrong, but because she had shown them something real. That night, as she closed the restaurant and sat alone for a moment, she touched the piano keys gently. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the lights. She thought about how much had changed, how one moment of courage had opened a door she thought was locked forever. Her life wasn't perfect. She still worked long hours, still faced challenges. But now, every morning when she woke up, she felt grateful. Not for the attention or the praise, but for the simple truth that she had found her way back to the thing that made her feel alive. She smiled to herself, whispering, "Music never leaves you. It just waits until you're ready to listen again." And as her fingers played a quiet melody into the empty room, the sound carried softly through the night. A reminder that no dream is ever truly lost, only waiting to be remembered. The months passed quietly, yet everything in her life had changed. The restaurant where she worked had become known not just for its fine food, but for the woman who played the piano with such heart that even strangers walked away changed. She had grown used to the whispers, the soft applause and the kind smiles that followed every song, but she never let it go to her head. Every time she sat at that piano, she still felt the same nervous flutter she'd felt the first night she played. And each note she played still carried her whole heart. People began traveling from nearby towns just to see her perform. On weekends, the place filled up long before sunset. Couples, families, and even children came to watch her, some sitting quietly, others recording short clips on their phones. Sometimes, when she finished playing, people would approach her with stories of their own. One woman told her, "I stopped chasing my dream years ago, but watching you tonight made me realize it's never too late." Another said softly, "Your music reminds me of someone I lost. Thank you for giving me a piece of them back." Each time someone spoke like that, she would smile shyly and say, "It means a lot that you listened." She wasn't used to praise, but she cherished these small connections. They made her feel like what she was doing mattered. At home, her life remained simple. She still lived in her small apartment, cooked her own meals, and took the bus to work every day. But her world felt fuller now, not because of fame or attention, but because she'd found a way to live with purpose again. One evening, after closing time, her manager came to her with a thoughtful look. "There's something I want to tell you," he said. She looked up from the piano bench where she'd been wiping the keys. "What is it?" He handed her a letter. "A music foundation from the city saw one of your videos. They want to invite you to perform at a charity event next month. It's for young musicians who can't afford lessons." Her eyes widened slightly. "They want me to perform?" "Yes," he said with a smile. "They said your story moved them. How you found your way back to music after so many years. They think you'd inspire the students." She stared at the letter for a long time, unsure what to feel. Part of her was excited, but another part was afraid. She had spent so many years hiding from the spotlight. Playing in front of restaurant guests was one thing, but standing on a real stage again, that felt different. "I don't know if I can," she said quietly. Her manager leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "You've already done harder things. You played for a room full of people who mocked you once, remember? If you could do that, you can do this." His words stayed with her that night as she walked home. The streets were quiet, the air cool against her face. She kept thinking about what it would mean to play in front of young musicians, kids who might have the same dreams she once did. When she reached her apartment, she placed the letter on her small table and sat there in silence. For a moment, she closed her eyes and imagined the piano, the crowd, the lights, fear mixed with excitement, and she didn't know which one was stronger. But deep down, she knew she couldn't say no. Maybe this was her chance to give back, to remind others that even broken dreams could find their way home. The following week, she wrote a short reply to the foundation, accepting the invitation. When she dropped the letter in the mailbox, she felt both nervous and free, like she was stepping into a new chapter of her life. As the day of the event drew closer, she practiced whenever she could. After her restaurant shifts, she would stay late, playing soft melodies while the lights dimmed and the room grew quiet. Her fingers ached sometimes, but she didn't mind. The piano had become her companion, her peace, her truth. She didn't choose songs that showed off skill or speed. She chose pieces that told stories. Songs that carried emotion, that reminded people of home, of love, of things lost and found again. When the night of the event arrived, she stood backstage, dressed simply but neatly. The hall was larger than anything she'd ever imagined. Rows of seats stretched out before her, filled with guests, musicians, teachers, and students. She could hear the soft murmur of the crowd as the host spoke on stage, introducing the performers. Her hands were slightly cold. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment. "Just play from the heart," she whispered to herself. When her name was announced, the audience applauded politely. She walked onto the stage, her steps steady but her heart racing. The lights felt warm on her skin. She sat down at the grand piano, larger and brighter than the one at the restaurant, and for a moment, everything went silent. She began to play. The first notes filled the hall like a soft breeze. Her fingers moved slowly at first, then faster, each chord flowing naturally into the next. It wasn't just music. It was a story, her story, of struggle, silence, rediscovery, and hope. People leaned forward in their seats. Some closed their eyes. Some held hands. The music carried something unspoken, something pure and real. By the time she reached the final note, the entire hall was silent. Then came the applause, louder, deeper, filled with warmth. She stood up slowly, bowing her head in gratitude. After the performance, several people came up to her backstage. A few students hugged her, their eyes bright with tears. One young girl said softly, "I want to play like you someday." She smiled and placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "Don't try to play like me," she said. "Play like you. That's where your magic is." The event organizers thanked her for coming and handed her a small envelope as a token of appreciation. But the true gift she received that night wasn't money. It was the joy of seeing how her music touched people's lives. On her way home, she looked out the window of the bus as the city lights passed by. She thought about the long road that had brought her here, from the days of cleaning tables and swallowing humiliation to this moment of quiet triumph. When she got home, she placed the envelope on her small table next to the letter that had started it all. She sat by her window listening to the soft sounds of the city and smiled. The next few weeks brought even more opportunities. Invitations came in from other places, small concerts, interviews, charity events. But she remained grounded. She still worked at the restaurant during the week and still played there on weekends. To her, that place wasn't just a job anymore. It was where her second life had begun. The restaurant's regular customers continued to support her, proud to say they'd heard her before the world did. Some even brought their children just to listen. But amidst all the attention and excitement, she stayed humble. She still helped her coworkers, still smiled the same quiet smile, still took time to listen when someone shared a story. One night, after a performance, an elderly man approached her. He looked frail, his hand shaking slightly as he held onto a cane. "I wanted to thank you," he said softly. "My wife passed away last year. I haven't been able to listen to music since then. But tonight, when you played, I felt her here with me again." Tears filled her eyes. "I'm honored," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." Moments like that made her realize what music truly was. Not just sound, but connection. A bridge between hearts, between past and present. Between people who might never meet again but would always share that one moment. As her reputation grew, a few small recording studios reached out to her, offering to help her create an album. She hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready. But with encouragement from her manager and the support of her new friends, she decided to give it a try. She spent her evenings after work in a small studio, recording her favorite pieces, songs that had carried her through the hardest times of her life. She titled the album Silent Keys. It was a collection of simple piano melodies, raw, emotional, and real. When it was released online, it quickly gained attention. People said her music helped them relax, sleep, heal, or simply feel understood. She didn't expect success. She only hoped her music could bring peace to others the way it had brought peace to her. Despite the growing attention, she never forgot where she started. Sometimes, when the restaurant was empty after closing, she would sit at the piano alone, playing softly under the dim lights. It was her way of saying thank you to life, to chance, to music itself. That night, as she finished a quiet melody, she looked around the empty restaurant and whispered, "Everything I needed was always right here." She had once been a waitress who people mocked. Now she was a pianist who reminded the world what humility and passion could create when they met in the same heart. And though the applause faded each night, the echoes of her songs remained, not just in the walls of the restaurant, but in the hearts of everyone who had ever heard her play. The seasons changed again, and with each one her life felt a little more beautiful. The restaurant was busier than ever, not because of fame, but because people found something there that felt warm and real. Every night, she still took her seat at the piano, her hands moving gently across the keys. The lights dimmed, the room grew quiet, and people listened, not with noise, but with hearts wide open. It was never about showing off. It was about telling stories without words. But one evening, something unexpected happened. A man in a dark suit walked into the restaurant carrying a camera bag and a small microphone. He asked the manager if he could record her playing. At first, she was shy about it. She didn't like cameras. She liked moments. But the manager told her it might help more people hear her music, especially those who couldn't come in person. So, she agreed. That night, he recorded her as she played a soft, emotional tune she'd written herself. The sound of the piano filled the room, calm and gentle like rain touching leaves. When she finished, everyone clapped softly and the man smiled. A week later, the video was uploaded online. It didn't go viral right away, but slowly people began sharing it. They said things like, "This song healed something inside me. Her playing feels honest, not forced. You can tell she's lived what she plays." Within months, the video reached millions of views. People from around the world left comments, from students, workers, parents, and even other musicians. They said her story gave them courage to keep going, even when life felt heavy. When she found out, she was stunned. She never imagined her music would travel so far. She still lived the same quiet life, still took the bus, still smiled at the same customers. But now, somewhere out there, strangers she'd never met were listening to her piano late at night and feeling less alone. One day, a letter arrived at the restaurant, addressed to her. It was written in neat handwriting from a girl who lived across the ocean. The letter said, "I used to think my dreams didn't matter. I stopped playing piano after my father died. But then I saw your video. You made me remember why I started. Thank you for giving me back my hope." She read that letter over and over again. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from a deep, quiet joy. She never set out to change lives. She just wanted to share something honest. And somehow that honesty had found its way to others. As months passed, more invitations came. One was from a concert hall in another city, much bigger than the charity event she'd done before. They wanted her to perform for a music festival that celebrated unsung talents, ordinary people who did extraordinary things. She hesitated again. Crowds still made her nervous, but she remembered the girl's letter and the many people who'd found peace through her music. Maybe this time it wasn't about her anymore. Maybe it was about giving something back, so she said yes. The day of the performance arrived and the hall was full. The crowd wasn't loud or fancy. They were people from all walks of life. Some came with children, some alone, and some holding hands with loved ones. Backstage, she sat quietly, breathing slowly. She looked down at her hands and smiled softly. "You've come a long way," she whispered to herself. When her name was announced, the room filled with applause. She stepped onto the stage, the lights warm on her face. There was a grand piano waiting for her, shining under the glow. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and for a moment she just closed her eyes. She didn't think about the crowd or the lights or the cameras. She thought about the long journey that had brought her here, the nights she spent wiping tables, the pain of being mocked, the courage it took to play again, and the peace she found through the keys. Then she began to play. The music started slow, almost whispering. Then it grew, flowing like water, soft but full of strength. Every note carried a piece of her story, the struggles, the small joys, the quiet moments of healing. As she played, the audience grew completely silent. Some smiled through tears. Others held their breath. It was as if time itself had stopped to listen. When she finished, the hall erupted in applause. Not wild or loud, but full of feeling. People stood up, clapping, cheering, calling her name. She bowed her head, her heart full. For the first time, she didn't feel small anymore. She felt seen, understood, and at peace. After the show, a journalist asked her backstage, "What inspired you to play tonight's piece?" She smiled gently and said, "Life did. Every little moment, good and bad. Music helped me survive when words couldn't." Her answer was simple, but it spread widely. Newspapers, blogs, and online channels shared her story. The waitress who taught the world to listen. Over time, she began teaching small piano workshops at the same music foundation that had first invited her months ago. The students came from different backgrounds, some poor, some shy, some afraid to try. She saw herself in each of them. She never acted like a teacher who knew everything. She told them, "The piano doesn't care if you're rich or poor. It only listens to your heart. So play what you feel, not what you think sounds perfect." Her words stayed with the students long after the classes ended. Some even wrote her letters saying her lessons changed how they saw themselves. One day, the restaurant owner, who had supported her from the beginning, decided to hold a small celebration for her. He didn't tell her at first. He simply asked her to come early one evening. When she arrived, the place was filled with familiar faces, co-workers, regular customers, the man who once doubted her, and even a few students she'd taught. The piano was decorated with flowers, and a small banner hung over it that read, "To the woman who reminded us what real music feels like." She stood there speechless, her eyes shining with emotion. The owner walked up and handed her a small envelope. Inside was a note that said, "For all the times you filled this room with more than music, for filling it with hope." She looked around the room, feeling her throat tighten. Every person there had once been part of her journey. The laughter, the pain, the learning, the courage. That night she played one more song. It wasn't planned or rehearsed. She just let her heart lead. The melody was soft, full of gratitude and peace. And as she played, she realized something. She didn't need fame, she didn't need recognition. All she ever needed was to be true to herself. When the last note faded, there was silence, the kind of silence that says everything. Then came the gentle sound of applause, mixed with quiet sniffles and smiles. Later that night, as she walked home under the streetlights, she thought about how far she'd come. The girl who was once mocked had become someone others looked up to, not because she fought back, but because she forgave, moved on, and kept her heart open. She still worked at the restaurant part-time, even when people told her she didn't need to anymore. She said it reminded her where she came from, and that humility was more precious than fame. Sometimes, after hours, she'd stay a little longer, playing for the empty chairs, the quiet lights, and the memories that lived between the walls. Her music had started as a way to heal herself. Now it healed others too. And though the applause would fade each night, the feeling it left behind of that quiet peace, that shared warmth, stayed with her forever. Years later, when people spoke about her, they didn't talk about fame or awards. They said things like, "She made you feel something real," or, "When she played, you remembered what love sounded like." That was her legacy, not in notes or recordings, but in the hearts she had touched. And somewhere, late at night, if you walked past that old restaurant, you might still hear the faint sound of a piano, gentle, timeless, full of life, telling the story of a woman who once was mocked, but who answered cruelty not with anger but with music, and that music never stopped.